3 very disturbing YouTuber horror stories. Jenna had always felt confident behind the camera. Her channel, Nightmare Chronicles, had been growing steadily, each horror story she told drawing more and more viewers. She was at ease, speaking to her audience, the soft hum of her computer in the background. The glow of her monitor illuminated her face, setting the perfect mood for her latest story. A chilling tale about an entity that watches from the shadows. She had always been fearless when telling these stories, but tonight was different. Her fingers trembled slightly as she hit the Go Live button, the screen filling with messages and excitement. A familiar sight. Jenna smiled, reading through the chat. The usual banter filled the space, and the anticipation of her storytelling began to buzz through her veins. But then, something unexpected caught her eye. Watcher123 has joined the stream. Jenna paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Who was that? It wasn't a name she recognized. A shiver crept down her spine, but she shook it off. Probably just a new viewer. She laughed nervously and resumed her story. But the messages from Watcher123 kept coming. I see you. Jenna's smile faltered. What was that supposed to mean? She tried to laugh it off, but there was an unsettling chill creeping through her, as if something, was lurking just beyond the screen. She continued, but her words faltered slightly. Was this just someone messing with her? Or was it something more? The messages kept coming. I know what you're doing. I'm always watching. Jenna's heart thudded in her chest. She stopped talking, staring at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was this a joke? A prank? She forced herself to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. She typed, trying to push past the rising unease. All right, who's messing with me? She tried to sound lighthearted. You're starting to creep me out, Watcher. But the messages didn't stop. I'm watching you right now. You don't see me, but I see you. Her stomach churned, her chest tightened. This wasn't just some random prank, this was something else. The words on the screen weren't playful anymore. They were too deliberate, too familiar, too intimate. She could feel her pulse quickening as she glanced nervously at the door behind her. Was someone actually here? Was there someone watching her right now? Jenna's mind raced. She forced herself to continue with the story, but it was harder now. Her voice wavered slightly. She tried to ignore it, to push through, but something felt wrong. And then, as she spoke, something happened. The screen flickered. It was brief, just a second, but it was enough. She froze. Her eyes darted to the chat. Watcher123 hadn't stopped. They were still there, still commenting. I've seen you before. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she reached to adjust the camera. Something was wrong. She was sure of it now. Her throat felt dry, and she could hear her heartbeat in her ears. Who is this person? She could feel the air growing thicker, heavier, as if it were closing in around her. The room seemed colder than before. The buzzing sound of her computer now felt deafening in the silence that had settled around her. And then, the screen flickered again. This time, it didn't just go out for a second. It froze. Panic shot through her like electricity. She clicked on everything, her hands shaking. Why wasn't it responding? Her screen was blank. No feed. Nothing. The chat was still running, messages streaming in, but the feed had frozen. She sat there, staring at her unresponsive computer, trying to steady her breathing. She was alone. She had to be. Right? But then, she saw something. It was subtle at first. A small flicker, a shadow moving just beyond the corner of her screen. She blinked. Had she imagined it? She glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Just the room, dim and quiet. But then, tap. The sound was so soft, she wasn't sure if it was real or if her mind was playing tricks on her. She stiffened, straining to hear it again. A soft tap, followed by another. Her heart pounded. What was that? It wasn't her imagination. It was real. The door to her room was slightly ajar. It hadn't been like that before. She was sure she'd locked it. "Who's there?" Her breath quickened. She stood up, her knees shaking. The room felt smaller, darker now. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. She couldn't tell if it was coming from behind her or from somewhere outside. "Hello?" Her voice trembled as she spoke into the silence, but there was no answer. No movement, just the tapping. Closer now. Louder. More insistent. Jenna's heart raced as she turned back to her screen. There, on the edge of the frame, was a shadow. A figure. A shape. Standing just out of sight, but so close she could almost feel its presence. She spun around, eyes wide, but there was nothing. The tapping stopped. For a moment there was silence, but the stillness felt wrong. Her breath hitched. Her mouth was dry. She couldn't move. Her body was frozen in place, unable to react. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. A face. A figure. Just beyond the doorway. The outline of it, dark and formless, loomed in the shadows. Jenna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the breath was sucked from her chest. She stumbled back, her heart thudding painfully in her ears. Who are you?" she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, its eyes glowing in the dim light, watching. Her hand trembled as she grabbed her phone, dialing for help. But there was no signal, no service, no escape. The figure was closer now. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, its presence more imposing. It was right there, standing in the doorway. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat felt tight, her body paralyzed with terror. And then the voice came again, soft, almost a whisper. "I've been watching you." Her world shattered. The walls closed in. The room became suffocating. She tried to turn away, but it was too late. The figure reached out, its cold touch brushing her arm as the world around her spun into darkness. This is very creepy YouTuber horror story number 2. Fallon had always loved making YouTube videos. It wasn't just about the fame or the views. It was the connection with her audience, the thrill of sharing her experiences with the world. But tonight felt different. It was a Friday evening, and she was about to embark on something new, something that had everyone talking. Her chat was already buzzing with excitement as she prepared for her latest stream. She just received an early access code for a new game, Echoes of the Forgotten. The hype surrounding it was unreal. Everyone said it was the scariest game of the year. Fallon couldn't resist. She had to try it for herself. As she sat in front of her computer, Fallon adjusted her webcam. She smiled at the camera, hoping her nerves wouldn't show. "All right, guys," she said, her voice trying to sound upbeat, but the tension in her chest was palpable. "Tonight, we're playing Echoes of the Forgotten. This game is supposed to be insane, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm already freaked out. But hey, let's jump in and see what happens, right?" The chat exploded with excitement. "Can't wait for this. I'm already scared for you, Fallon. This is gonna be awesome." Fallon laughed nervously. She hit start, and the game loaded. Her character, Alice, stood in front of an eerie old mansion. The air was thick with fog. It was night in the game, and the house loomed before her like a dark, twisted silhouette. The wind howled. The trees swayed. Fallon shivered, even though the room around her was warm. The game's soundtrack was soft, almost haunting, and she could feel her heart rate increase with every passing second. "This place looks creepy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can already feel the tension." She moved her character down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The camera shifted, revealing cobwebs in every corner, dust floating in the air, as though the mansion had been abandoned for decades. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, but it was hard to focus. Her mind was racing. The game was well designed, no doubt, but something about it felt wrong. The whispers started, soft at first, barely noticeable, but then, as she walked deeper into the house, they grew louder. "Behind you." Fallon froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked at the screen, trying to convince herself that it was just a part of the game's soundtrack, a clever trick. But the voice, it felt too real, too close. "What the hell?" she muttered under her breath. "I swear I didn't hear that before." She hesitated, her hand still on the mouse, but a part of her, maybe the curiosity, maybe the thrill, urged her to continue. Okay, no big deal," she said, trying to laugh it off. "It's just the game. It's just the game." But as she turned her character around, her breath caught in her throat. There was nothing there. Nothing but empty, decaying walls. Fallon exhaled in relief, laughing nervously again. "Okay, so I was just hearing things. Classic Fallon freakout." Her chat was blowing up with messages, everyone sharing in her confusion. But then, another message appeared. "Turn around." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the chat, her mind spinning. No, it wasn't just the game. It was someone talking to her, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Her hands trembled as she slowly moved her character around. But just like before, there was nothing behind her, just the same empty hallway. She sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. Her pulse was pounding in her ears. "Okay, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not imagining this." Another message appeared. "Look closer." Fallon's breath caught in her throat. Her hands felt heavy as she guided Alice closer to the hallway. She moved the mouse slowly, carefully, feeling the weight of the tension building inside her. And then, she saw it, a figure, a shadow, standing at the far end of the hallway, just barely visible in the dim light. Fallon's heart raced. She couldn't believe it. Her hand hovered over the mouse as she tried to steady her breathing. "Did you guys see that?" she asked, her voice shaking. What is that?" The chat exploded with comments. "Oh my God, it's there!" "Fallon, go back. What is that?" Fallon didn't want to look. Every part of her screamed to turn away, to shut the game down, but she couldn't. The pull of the unknown was too strong. The shadow, it didn't move. It just stood there, watching her. Her finger twitched on the mouse and she slowly, almost unwillingly, moved Alice forward. Her heart thudded in her chest. And then, just like that, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty again. Fallon didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Okay, that was freaky. But there was no time to relax. Her screen flickered. The lights in the game started to stutter. Alice's flashlight flickered in and out of focus. Okay, we've got some glitches here," Fallon said, but her voice faltered. This is getting weird." And then, without warning, the screen went black. The game was gone. Fallon's stomach dropped. She stared at the empty screen, blinking in disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" she whispered. She clicked the mouse, trying to bring the game back, but nothing happened. Her webcam feed was still active. Her microphone was still picking up sound. But the game? Gone. Her chat was completely silent. No messages, no viewers, nothing. Fallon felt a cold chill creep up her spine. Was this some kind of prank? She checked her streaming software. Everything was fine on her end. But where were her viewers? Why was there no response? The silence in her room felt deafening. Just then, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, hands shaking, heart pounding. The screen flashed an unknown number. A part of her wanted to ignore it, but some primal part of her urged her to answer. She swiped to accept the call. The silence on the other end was suffocating. And then, just as her anxiety reached its peak, the voice came through. It was distorted, crackling. "You shouldn't have looked." The line went dead. Fallon stared at her phone, eyes wide, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her body was frozen. What the hell was happening? The screen flickered back to life. The game returned. But something was different. Alice's surroundings were different. The shadows were deeper, the walls closer. The once empty hallway now felt suffocating. Fallon moved her character forward, her fingers trembling. The game was glitching more now. The atmosphere was oppressive. But it wasn't just the game. It felt wrong. And then, just as she thought she couldn't handle it anymore, the screen went black again. Her chat was empty. The game was gone. Her viewers, gone. Fallon sat in complete silence, and then her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't answer. The whispers had only just begun. "This is Most Scary YouTuber Horror Story number 3. It was long past midnight when Giovanna finished her latest gaming stream. Her body was still buzzing with the rush of adrenaline from the last few rounds of gameplay. But there was something about tonight, something that felt different. She could feel it, deep in her gut, a strange, unsettling sensation. Her hands were still tingling from hours of intense gaming. She glanced at the clock in the corner of her screen. 3 a.m. Her mind was racing. She'd been streaming for so long, but she wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. Just a quick break. Then one more round to finish off the session. Giovanna rubbed her eyes, leaning back in her chair and stretching her arms, trying to shake off the exhaustion. But that odd feeling, that nagging sense of unease, it wouldn't go away. She couldn't explain it. The game she had been playing, Midnight Silence, was nothing new. A popular horror thriller. Her viewers loved it. They lived for her reactions, the way she handled the scares with ease. But tonight felt different. A faint chime from her phone interrupted her thoughts. She picked it up, mindlessly scrolling through messages. One of her regular viewers was asking about the new update for Midnight Silence, and just as she was about to reply, the screen flickered. "Wait, what?" Her game froze. "Okay, that's weird," she muttered to herself, clicking the mouse, trying to get it to respond. But nothing happened. The screen remained completely still. Giovanna frowned, clicking more frantically. This wasn't right. She'd played Midnight Silence before, and sure, it glitched occasionally, but this felt different. She checked the chat, but it was empty. Completely empty. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't normal. "Where'd everyone go?" she mumbled aloud, checking the viewer count. It was at 0. The chat was silent. Her stomach turned. Why was no one talking? Then, as if on cue, a message popped up. "I see you." Giovanna blinked. It wasn't a viewer she recognized. Her pulse quickened. The chat was still empty. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching the screen, feeling the hairs on her neck stand up. Was this a prank? No. Something about it felt wrong. She stared at the words, her fingers trembling as she typed. "Who is this?" she asked aloud. Her voice was shaky. This wasn't a joke. No reply. Nothing. The chat remained still. Suddenly, the game froze again. But this time, when the screen returned to normal, Giovanna's webcam was live, and what she saw sent a jolt of panic through her chest. The webcam feed flickered. For a second, she saw her reflection, her familiar face staring back at her, her room as it always was. But then, something strange happened. The shadows seemed to stretch, longer than usual. The corners of the room became unnaturally dark, as if they were swallowing the light. And then, she saw it. Out of the corner of the frame, just beyond the door, something moved. Her breath caught in her throat. Her pulse raced. Did someone just walk by? Was it a shadow? Or was it Something else? Something real? Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out the sound of her computer fans. She felt dizzy. Was she imagining things? The movement was quick, but it was there. Her eyes never left the screen. Giovanna hesitated, not sure what to do. Could this be a glitch? She tried to brush it off, her thoughts racing. No, that didn't look like a glitch. The message appeared again. I see you. Giovanna's stomach twisted into a tight knot. No, this wasn't just a joke. Something wasn't right. But how? How could anyone be watching? The chat was silent, still, empty. Her mind whirled, a million questions crashing together. The lights flickered. Her webcam feed shook. She froze. She had to do something, anything. But the next message made her blood run cold. I'm coming for you. Her throat tightened. A cold sweat dripped down the back of her neck. The message, the dark figure. Her heart was pounding. Who was watching her? She wasn't imagining it. She couldn't be. Giovanna scrambled for her phone, her fingers slick with sweat as she dialed the police. It felt like hours before they picked up. Yes, I think someone's in my apartment. Her voice cracked. No one was supposed to be here. Her phone buzzed. Another notification. She was terrified to look, but her fingers shook as she opened the message. I'm already here. Terror shot through her like an electric shock. They were inside the apartment. Giovanna's breath caught. She looked toward the door. The figure. The shadow. It was real. It was right there. Another message. You can't hide from me. Giovanna's hands were shaking. She could hear footsteps now. Slow, deliberate, and coming closer. They weren't just in the game anymore. This was real. She could feel it in her bones. The air grew thick, suffocating. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The footsteps, they were closer now. Then the figure in the corner of the frame vanished. The door creaked open. And suddenly, there was nothing. Nothing but silence. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She wasn't alone. But there was no one there. Not anymore. And then, the final message appeared. You can't run from me. Giovanna's heart raced, her breath shallow, her body trembling. She stood up, unable to sit still, too afraid to move. She didn't know what to do anymore. The silence was deafening. She grabbed her phone, her fingers slipping as she tried to call for help again. Then another message popped up. I'm waiting. The room felt cold. So cold. Giovanna's voice trembled as she whispered aloud, Who are you? What do you want from me? No response. But as the room grew colder and darker, her heart knew the answer was coming. And whatever it was waiting for her.